Hello and welcome to your go-to Detroit Pistons podcast, the Pistons Pulse, co-hosted by me, Bryce Simon of Motor City Hoops, a former D1 Hooper and current teacher, husband, and father of three amazing kids.
And I'm Omari Sankofa II, Pistons beat writer for the Detroit Free Press.
And of course, we're always blessed to be joined by our producer, Wes Davenport, which if you are not listening to him and Blake Silverman on the Pin Down over on the Detroit Bad Boys YouTube channel, you absolutely should. Thank you to Order of the Blazing Horse, Mike, Bump, Teeps, all of you guys joining us here. What up, though? Good morning, all of that. Yes, this is a special Saturday morning live edition of the Pistons Pulse. Whenever we get around the holidays, sometimes we got to change up the recording schedule. Amari obviously traveling. We realize there is a game tonight. We understand that my internet situation's about to be real suspects. As Downtown Deuce joining us. What up? Downtown. My internet situation is about to be suspect for the next 4 or 5 days. So we thought this would be better. Amari's traveling, so we're hoping his internet will hold up in the hotel, but always wanting to bring you Pistons content. Today, we will kind of look a little bit more big picture. We're going to do some trivia at the end that I think will be a lot of fun. But to start us off, Omari, where are you at right now? What hotel you at? How's this West Coast trip treating you?
Yeah, I am in downtown Phoenix. Got in super late last night. I don't think my flight left till like 9:30 p.m. or something. But yeah, sunny Phoenix. I look out my window and I'm like downtown across from the arena. So you see mountains in the background and it's probably like 50, 60 degrees outside. So yeah, unique vibe for Christmas, I would say. Not too often you get arid desert weather a few days before the holiday, but yeah, and then I'll be in LA and I'm actually spending Christmas at home, so skipping Sacramento, but then we'll be in Denver a week from now. So busy week ahead, fun week ahead for sure.
So Mike says, shout out from the Philippines, fan since 1989. I love it. Dax Hoops, what up, fellas? Thank you, everybody, for joining us. This will be an episode where you guys can really be very engaged. Obviously, always can be engaged for our live viewers. But as we talk through kind of some of these bigger picture conversations as we're a third of the way through the season for Detroit, you guys, we want to hear what your guys' thoughts are. I kept some from social media, Twitter, Blue Sky, all of that. We'll get them in here as well. YouTube user always joining us here. So let's start off with this, Omari. We've had 2 games, I believe, since our last recording. First one was another crazy game. I think you tweeted this out. The Pistons only play crazy games against Miami. The one before this one was the overtime game where first, Tyler Hero goes bananas and forces overtime. Again. No, the first one he did it, but then he did it again. But in the first one, then Spo, that was the timeout game, right? Where he pulled the Chris Webber, called the timeout he didn't have. Now in this one, Detroit's up 17, all of that. Can't really pull away and close the game out. And then what's Tyler Hero do again, Amari? He goes crazy. And then in overtime, Detroit gets down by 8, I believe. And then Tim Hardaway Jr. decides it's his turn. So your takeaway from that Miami game before we talk about the most recent one.
Yeah, crazy game. I always joke. It's just a newspaper joke. Or at least a lot of us will file like an instant story right when the buzzer hits, which requires a unique mix of sort of timely game observations that don't depend on the final score, but also you still have to talk about what happened in the game. And games like that are almost impossible to get in on time because they were up, and then Miami made that run, and then you're in OT, and then you're down, and then Tim Hardaway Jr. hits 3 straight threes in the span of like 45 seconds, maybe, if that. I don't even think it was that long. I think it was a lot shorter than that, actually. And it makes it really hard to tell your game stories in on time. So the Pistons have had a lot of those this season. I did get that one in on time, so shout out to me. I just want to give myself credit for that.
That's impressive because I imagine as that game is playing out, it's like, wow, what a performance from the Detroit Pistons as they, are up on a fully healthy Miami Heat team by double digits almost the whole game. And then you can kind of like until they do a Pistons thing and they let Miami cut into the lead and Tyler Hero goes crazy.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm about to hit submit. Nope, overtime. And then it's like, okay, we've seen this before. They lose the lead. The other team has the momentum. They start out strong in overtime. Wait, what's Tim Hardaway Jr. doing? Like, I just imagine the iterations and having to go back and fix like the little quotes here and there had to be just, I always worry even just doing my stuff. So I guess this is a good time to shout ourselves out. Make sure you're reading Omari on the Detroit Free Press. He brings you the best coverage of the Detroit Pistons. Would love for you to subscribe to the Motor City Hoops Substack, where I give notes and analysis in a much less like formal capacity. It's very raw notes, but I do that sometimes as well, Omari. I'll make a note on something, and then I'm like, oh shoot, did I ever come back and like finish that thought? Or what does that like look like now that the game completely changed?
Yeah, no, it's just funny. Like I've been doing instant gamers since college, and they've gotten easier. But basketball is just such a chaotic sport, and especially now with the three, that a 10-point lead is really not a 10-point lead. Like you could lead by 10 with like a minute 09, 10 years ago, and that's like a win, right? Like it would take a Tim Hardaway. I'm sorry, it would take a Tracy McGrady like 13 points in 30 seconds to like come back from that, and now. Like Tyler Hero, the 3-point slider straight up to 100 whenever there's like a minute or left on the clock. And the Pistons have given me some really hard gamers to write because these games have just seesawed up and down, up and down. But it's interesting. Like that was like a really, really, truly ugly win that they probably should not have come away with. And they got it. And we talked about it before. I don't really have a lot to say about that game just because it was such a wild, chaotic game that it's just one of those games, But to have a guy like Tim Hardaway Jr., who I think he opened the game 0 for 2 from 3, and then I don't think he hit another 3 again until he hit those 3 at the end. And when you just have those on-off shooters, it just leads to crazy scenarios like that. And it's good to have a guy in THJ who can turn it on and get you a win here and there when like nobody else can shoot, like how they had last night or how they had that night.
So we will obviously talk about individual players as we go throughout. Special shout out to Asar Thompson in that game. I thought he had a really good game. He had a really good third quarter. Specifically, Pistons followed that game up with real quick, Matthews from our guy from Brazil. Shout out from your favorite Brazilian fan. Thank you. And thank you to everybody joining us. If you're dropping comments, Wes is starring them. A lot of these things we kind of have on the outline, but we'll shout you out as we get to those things as well. They follow that up with the loss to Utah. Listen, I don't often have people in my personal life text me about Piston stuff because people in my personal life don't care about the Pistons. But my best friend texted me during that game. I wasn't watching live. I had our K-2 girls basketball into the year scrimmage that I was a part of. Literally the most exhausted I've ever been coaching a basketball game, Omari. Like those little 6, 7, and 8-year-olds, they wear me out, man, trying to coach them up. But we had a lot of fun. But I look at my phone when that's over and he just texted me Detroit versus Utah ? And I was like, oh no, this cannot be good. Yeah. And so as people know by now, Detroit gives up a huge lead of almost 30 points, whatever. They come back. They never really get able to come over the top. Holland gets ejected. Cade had a good scoring night. The defense in general. What was your takeaways from that specific game before we started to get into these bigger picture things?
Yeah, they just didn't have it that night for whatever reason. Outside of Cade, nobody else could get a bucket. Just a really ugly game. They got punched early. You're down 48-19 at the end of the first, and they won every quarter after that. But, I mean, you're going to see a handful of these games every single season where it's just like you get punched in the mouth early, and then you try to whittle your way back through the rest of the game, and you just fall short. Long story short, you can't trail by 29 against any team, let alone a team that had 5 wins going into that game. They had some injuries, obviously. J.I. was out. Isaiah Stewart was out. But even so, that game just sucked. I mean, I don't really know what else to say. It was just a bad game. That's the type of game you just take the footage and throw it away and keep it pushing, because I don't know what you take from that game that's something you can build off of, honestly.
YouTube user says something I do think is important, and then we can move on. YouTube user says, I was disappointed in Asar and Cade on defense to start the game. That's an important point, because the scapegoats in general, and I'm not saying this is wrong, and we'll talk about this later, are always Jalen Duren and Tim Hardaway Jr. that was not Jalen Duren's fault to the start of that game. Like it wasn't him. Now, Tim Hardaway Jr. may have been at fault because some of the shots he took offensively, but like there was a SAR not getting through screens. There was Utah just making like big time shots as well. But then also the start of the second half where Detroit really needed to make it a game and had a chance to. THJ and Duren were not involved in either of those 3-point makes to start the second half. So I'm not here defending their defense. That's not what I'm trying to do, big picture. What I'm saying is it wasn't specifically them or just them in that game. And I feel like it's always, oh, the Pistons gave up 49 points in a quarter. Duren must have sucked on defense. That wasn't the sole case in this game. Duren hasn't been good on defense, but it was other people's at fault in that game, including the offense, and then a bigger picture thing I'll save for later on. So any other thoughts about that game, or are you ready to roll into the big picture third of the year takeaways?
The only thing I would say is that I think Utah was like 9 for 13 from 3 or something like that first quarter. And especially now with just how good teams are like shooting from 3. Like it used to be that like every team had like 1 or 2 guys who could like really knock down threes. And like that game, Colin Sexton and like
Keontae was awesome in that game. Keontae's very inefficient overall, Omari, but he can have nights like that, and he had one.
Yeah, I mean, both of those guys are 3 for 3 from 3 in the first. And yeah, like you said, it wasn't Duren. Like they were giving up too many open threes, but it's also just in today's NBA. Like teams could just get into a groove early, and next thing you know, you're down 29 because they knocked down 6 or 7 threes in a row. And the Pistons have had that happen a few times this season. It's happened to other teams as well. People talk about the 3 ball bringing the game down and this and that, but the flip side of it is that it really has created some truly wacky, games you normally don't see. Just because things can flip one way or the other so quickly. So. Yeah, long story short, it's just weird to watch basketball now where you can trail by 29, just because you failed to close out on a handful of threes. Like that's just the league's just such a weird place right now with the way teams can score. And people kind of saw that, and that's a bad loss, but teams aren't going to shoot that well from 3 to open games more often than not anyway. So we'll see how they respond tonight against Phoenix. But to me, that was just an outlier. Like if the guys shoot that well from 3 early and you're down 29 instead of 11 or whatever, then that's just a tough one.
2 things. One, I would like to have this conversation in the offseason. This whole 3-point has ruined the game, people not liking the way the game is played today and some stuff like that. So we'll revisit it because this isn't the episode to do it, but I do have thoughts. 2, I'm glad you brought up how they respond on Saturday night. A lot of you, when you listen to this, if you're not with us live right now, probably are going to be listening after the fact. The one thing I'll say is we have seen this team be able to respond when they really needed to. Now, sometimes it takes a couple losses. I'm not saying it will be on Saturday night against the Suns, but we have seen this team respond throughout the year. So let's get into some of the other takeaways. First thing, we have to start with Cade Cunningham. Omari, I don't know that we need to talk about his offense. He's been really good. We all know this. I threw out a stat the other day about guys that have averaged, I think at the time it was 23.5, 7.5, 9.5, and it hasn't been done that many times over the last 20 years. Obviously, Cade has only done it through 23 games, and as we record, he's actually under 7.5 assists. So take that for what it's worth. Offense has been awesome. Turnovers have to get better. Finishing around the rim continues to have to get better. I want to ask you about the defense because that is one big area for me. And our guy, Order of the Blazing Horse, said his big takeaway is the same as the underrated thing to look for going into the season. Two-way Cade is the man. So what are your thoughts about Cade just in general and this idea of him being this all-around two-way player?
Yeah. We've seen Cade for stretches be that type of guy, right? I think we've seen it much more this season. Maybe there's a question of how long he can sustain it, which we kind of had this conversation on the side, like me, you, and Wes the other night. Like he has to do so much offensively that sometimes I do wonder if that just saps his energy on defense, especially like Utah, where he's the only guy that can get a bucket, right? And I don't think he was defending as well that game, even though
he had the Lowry Markkanen matchup. Like he's trying to defend a bigger, really good player in that game. Like that's a tough matchup when you're also 30% usage on offense, to your point.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a super tough matchup. And from that 4 blocks in that game, I thought was really impressive. Also because he started the season off strong as a shot blocker, and then he kind of fell off, and that game kind of put him back where he was pretty close to it. But long story short, like, I think Cade, the way he defends, like, he can impact the game defensively in ways that a lot of elite ball handlers cannot. I looked at it the other day. The way he blocks shots is closer to that of like the bigger wings or guys who play bigger, like Derek White, rather than, maybe like an Anthony Edwards or somebody like that. I think we've seen Cade make strides on defense this season, and if the Pistons are ever able to add somebody next to him that could at least take off like half of that scoring load, then I do think he's a guy that could be a perennial, like one of the best two-way guys in the league every single year, because he's got that capability.
We're going to talk some more Cade as we go throughout. So let's move on, because I think he really fits into the overall team picture and what you said there, because some of these other conversations are going to lend itself to like, hey, if Cade only has to guard your third best perimeter player, that's a really good third defender on your team. And that conversation will happen when we talk about, honestly, the next two guys, Ron Holland and Ausar Thompson. So Keith Black Trudeau, obviously everybody in the content creation world, Pistons fan base world knows Keith, has tweeted this out a couple times and dropped this in our comments, said Ausar Thompson and Ron Holland are the two most important players on this team after Cade. That was his biggest takeaway. I'm not saying we agree with that. I'm not saying you agree with that, but just a jumping off point for what are your biggest takeaways with those two guys in particular?
Yeah. When they checked into the game against Utah, like, you could just feel the energy shift. And they are two players. I mean, Ron all season, when he checks in, you could just, like, he's always noticeable. Like, there are not too many moments where Ron's on the floor and you don't notice him, right? Like, he's always doing something. We know Ausar has that quality. And against Utah, like, when you just see how much of a wrecking crew that they can be, how much energy they give on defense, and just overall in a game like that, where like that easily could have been a 30-point blowout, and they fought the rest of the way. I thought Ron and Ausar had a lot to do with that. And I mean, look, you have two guys, around 6'6", 6'7", like really athletic in their own way, can play make, and get to the rim, do all these kind of toolsy things you need. And like, these guys are difference makers for the Pistons, and I think we're seeing more and more how they're able to complement with Cade and make things easier for him just with their defense and cutting and rebounds and things like that. So I thought they had a really fun game against Utah, even though they lost. And we talk about just what certain guys could bring to this team, and we'll talk about that later, I know. But to have two 6'6" who can do what they do, I think has been a really big lift for this team so far.
So I will say, before the year, I don't think I could have agreed with this. Mm-hmm. I'm starting to think it a little bit more. I'm not selling Jaden Ivey stock yet, and I know we're about to talk about him and all of that. But the idea of two guys that defend at the level that Ron and Ausar do next to Cade, if you put the other right pieces around them, Omari, is really, really intriguing to me. Because here's the thing, like, everybody wants them on there for their defense, and I understand that. But I'm going to sneeze, so you got to take over. I'm so sorry, everybody. Wasn't able to get to the mute button before that one. Amateur hour here over Christmas break. Sorry, Wes. Edit that part out.
Wes is cracking up.
I've been sick for like 3 weeks. It's really starting to piss me off, and then now it pays off with this. So, anyway, I love what those guys bring defensively. And Omari, one of my points I was going to make on the defensive end is those guys are disruptive. So I think part of the Pistons' defensive problem is they don't take anything away from the offense. They don't make the offense uncomfortable. I thought we saw that with Utah. Utah is the worst turnover team in the NBA. And if I counted correctly, they only turned them over 3 times in the first quarter. Now, by the end of the game, it was like 27. So we saw them do it eventually. But whenever Utah was cooking, Detroit wasn't making them uncomfortable. Ron comes in the game and he does it. Ausar has to figure out how to stop fouling, because right now he averages over 6 per 36 minutes this season. But those guys are difference makers in that way. I think Ron is going to shoot it still. I still believe in the form. I think he eventually gets there. Ausar's looks a little better. If you actually want to play those two guys together, though, either they have to really improve as shooters, or you have to put two very specific guys around them and then Cade. But I'm intrigued by this idea more so. And I think that's my biggest takeaway is before the year, I would have not felt this way. Ron has been better, honestly, than I thought he was going to be, even as high on him as I was. I'm very much intrigued by this if you build out the roster. So let's go to a short break. When we come back, we'll get your thoughts, a few more of those on Ron and Ausar before we move to JI and JD.
We're back with segment 2, and we're going to stick on this Ausar Ron topic for a little bit. But yes, I mean, to be 28 games into the season, a little bit past the 1/3 point, I think by the end of the year, you wanted to be able to say that Ron and Ausar were this kind of wrecking crew for his team, right? They come in and impact things defensively with their athleticism. They don't take too much away offensively with their lack of shooting. That you can survive and make that work. And I think what's nice about them is that we're seeing that happen, but they're also unique enough that you could see them playing together, depending on how their games develop from here. Ron, you mentioned the 3-point shooting. Like, I feel the same way. Like, I think his shot, there's nothing fundamentally broken about it. He just needs to get it to fall more. And like, he's still so young. Like, he was still 18 on draft night that, I think you could feel somewhat comfortable with him just getting used to taking threes and like NBA game action, right? Like at an NBA pace to get better. But yeah, long story short, if you have 3 guys who are 6'6", like with that type of versatility, and you just see how Ron and Ausar naturally know how to play off the Cade and make things easier, whether it's cutting or pushing in transition or whatever it may be, I think that gives you something to be excited about. Just knowing that you have 2 guys with this archetype who are showing things and could potentially give this team the edge, especially on defense, that it needs going forward.
I think what K-Stat, can you put that back up, Wes? What K-Stat 28 says here is what intrigues me about this. And K-Stat says, my philosophy, if you can't find your own Tatum and Brown, find guys that can guard Tatum and Brown. That's how the Pistons have always made themselves stand out in their history. I also think a lot of this has to do with what I believe Cade Cunningham is and what we've seen Cade Cunningham be through the first how many ever games of this season. He is so good offensively and improved defensively. I think you can afford to say, hey, let's get these athletic wings. And Keith, thank you. Keith, thank you for that comment. That I think you can afford to have these wings. Now, they just can't be complete non-shooters, though. Like, that completely disrupts the offense if both of them are non-shooters. Now, if you put a floor spacing big in there, a second big-time scorer creator, this whole thing works. You can't do it with a Keith Black Trudeau. Oh, my bad.
It's Keith.
It's
hey, what's up, Keith?
Keith, have to be there's Keith is a very common name. You got to be more specific. Keith Black Trudeau, the Keith Black Trudeau. So
why is your name not Keith Black Trudeau? Well, I understand wanting to have like an anonymous YouTube. So thanks for identifying yourself. But if you had just said Keith Black, we would have been like, oh yeah, there's only one Keith Black.
Yeah, and as Wes says, Ron having
Go ahead, Bryce.
Wes said Ron flashing some half-court bucket getting juice. We saw Ausar operate a Spain pick and roll the other day. He missed the shot, but then Duren got a putback offensive board. So I think there's a way to make this work. I will also say Ron Holland, very small sample, 7 of 15 in his last 9 games from 3. 7 of 15. Like, that's a decent stretch on very low volume where he's starting to maybe figure that out just a little bit. And, even the free throw percentage, sans the 2 ones that everybody actually remembers, is right there at 80%. So I think it's intriguing. Again, I think my biggest takeaway in terms of these guys is the idea of this is more exciting, more intriguing. I'm more bought into it than I was before the year started, which leads us into the other 2 guys, J.I. and J.D. And these are different conversations, but important ones. I don't know if we can have them at the same time. If we need to separate them, you go ahead. But your thoughts on those 2 guys?
Yeah, I think through the 1/3 part of the season, they are still defining, I think, their fits with this franchise and exactly what it is that they bring, that can contribute to winning night in and night out, which for them is just the conversation with them compared to Ron and Ausar is just so fundamentally different because of where they are timeline wise. But With JI and JD through the last 2/3 of the season, you want to see how they can sort of define their games and show how they can contribute to winning on this team. JI, like, he's been solid this season. He's shooting the three a lot better. Overall scoring's up a bit. He's missed a couple games with the left knee. But before that, the previous 2 weeks, he had been in a bit of a scoring drought. And that's been his career thus far. Like, he'll have like a really strong month, and then he'll have maybe 2 weeks here where he struggles a bit, and then he'll pick back up. It's been really up and down. But with JI, it's still okay. You figured out the shooting, but what else can you bring, right? When you see a star, and not just to compare guys directly, but I think as we see this team win more games, we're starting to see more and more what this team really needs. And if you're not bringing it defensively, then you really have to add a lot on offense, I think, to make up for that. And that's JI's charge. JD, I think you have to bring it defensively to really make your impact on this team. And 28 games in, I think those guys still are defining what they could do every single night to help this team move forward.
Yeah, so Mr. Ray says JI may still be inconsistent, but he's actually shown progress as time goes on. Duran, I wouldn't disagree with that. I want to stay on JI first, and then we can have the JD conversation. I've been one of the biggest supporters of Jaden Ivey. I do think what Mr. Ray said right there is true. I think he has shown improvement and growth. I would not sell on him yet. Team Savant, I'm not. We'll kind of talk about this a little bit better later. He says, no disrespect to JI, but trade both of them for something good. I wonder what the role ends up being. I still think he can play off of Cade, but he's not a volume 3-point shooter. He's not a volume floor spacer. And we've seen Malik Beasley thrive in that role playing off of Cade, right? Like, Beasley might be the 6th man of the year right now, thriving in that role on the offensive end. I know a lot of times people are like, okay, well then JI can be your 6th man, right? He's not the same player as these guys, but Malik Monk or Peyton Pritchard or whatever. He isn't the same type of player as those. Again, I've asked this question multiple times. How many top 5 picks end up as the 6th man and re-sign a contract and all of that for the team that drafted them? I just wonder if that's something he signs up for. I'm still in on JI. I would still like to see this play out, especially for the rest of the year, because we've seen it work. We've seen really good games of this. But here's where it becomes an issue. If you are saying Holland and Nassar are going to be 2 of the wings off of Cade and a center, right? And then you have one more spot. If JI is not this like 20, at least 20 plus, if not more scorer, that he can't be that 5th guy. And then it's probably going to have to be somebody else. And then again, it goes to, well, then can you bring JI off the bench? Does he sign up for that? I don't know. So that's where I'm starting to worry a little bit with JI is, can he be the level of score that I think they probably need him to be? And I just don't know that he's going to get there. We'll see. I'm still up for I'm not ready to sell on him completely. Obviously, there's always situations in certain moves that would make it happen, but that's where I'm at.
Yeah, because realistically, when you're building this roster going forward, you already have Cade on the max extension, and that kicks in after this upcoming offseason, so next season. Financially, you just have to figure out exactly how you divide the rest of your resources to maximize the roster around him. And I think we talk about this a lot, but whenever you have a rebuild, eventually you're going to have to figure out what to do with young guys as they get to the point where they're getting paid. And with JI, it's like that's going to be the conversation, right? Do we pay, based on the improvement we think he could show? Is he going to get the opportunity here he needs with the ball in Cade's hands to really grow his game out? There's all sorts of debates that are playing out and will, play out as the season goes on. But yeah, especially at this point, I think seeing how Ron and Nassar have been able to play off of Cade, you want the ball in Cade's hands. You want, and if the ball is not going to be in Cade's hands, it needs to be a guy who is at least as good with the ball or close to it. So I think that's JI's charge, like not just scoring, but how can you help either defensively or as a playmaker to get to that next stage?
That's a good point, because if all of a sudden he becomes the level of defender we've seen at times, then you're like, holy cow, like all of these dudes really guard on the perimeter. We can just go all in on defense, especially if we have a center that can do it and feel pretty good. Mr. Ray, I'm with you. Like he says, he's still 23 years old, third year as a guard. I think we need a bit more time with him. I'm with you. I'm not saying like trade JI at this deadline, like let's move on. I'm just saying I'm starting to be a little bit more curious about the fit, especially as Ron and Asar make their push into like, hey, we really fit well in this scenario, depending on how the team wants to build out. And I've always said this. I think Cade wants to be the all-around best player on the team, but you need a second dude that is a absolute bucket playing next to him. And if JI doesn't turn into an absolute bucket, that makes it hard. And so that's where, and here's the other thing. I think, we didn't say this with, like, how do we know Ron can't be that guy? Like Ron has that idea of a player. I'm not saying he gets there. I don't even know what percentage chance I would put on it. But as we talk about trading these guys and going and getting a second option, there are guys on the roster that could potentially get there that are very young. So we probably need to talk about Jalen Duren now. Listen, we've talked about it. I've talked about it on other podcasts. I'm sure you've been asked about it. The improvement hasn't been there. I mean, he hasn't been good enough defensively. The energy is not good enough. The other night, I don't think it was his fault against Utah, but I made a note in my breakdown. I didn't feel his presence, Omari. You know what? Paul Reed, and I'm not the biggest Paul Reed guy, especially compared to others, but when he's on the court, and in that game, he did make a positive defensive presence just by putting his hands up. Like they were hard hedging and blitzing the ball handler, and he put his hands up and he got a steal. He did it again in the lane and got a steal. Again, I'm not here like pushing B-ball Paul as like a starting center in the NBA, but I thought it was night and day difference between the energy he brought and just the activity. And that's not a great look for JD.
Yeah, I think that's what you notice a lot, when the other centers come into the game, is that just the overall hustle and activity level is so much higher. I think with JD and JI, we talked so much about the extensions next season, but they could easily both be guys who, in year 4 just got to play out and you figure it out. But like JD's got to figure out how to harness his athleticism and energy in ways that manifest not in just, essentially alley oops and, maybe some of the rebounds he gets. For that archetype to work, like at the very least, you have to be able to be an impactful defender, either in drop coverage or you got to stay in front of people. Like he has to have something that sticks out in that way. And I think as we see the season go on more and more, we're seeing JB leaned into tapping into rotation decisions that just brings that energy out. Because this team just has tendencies to kind of settle and fall into lows. And Duren, even though his game is so energetic, he's not quite that energy guy. And that's been, I think, interesting to see play out, when he's able to summon it and when he's not. And that's just going to be his path. I think it's a lot harder to last in this league as a center, if you can't defend. And that's just going to be his charge going forward. He's got to be able to sustain it for long stretches of time. Watch Al Horford, watch Bam, kind of see what guys around your size can do and how they move and how they impact games.
Downtown Deuce says, first time getting a chance to check the pod. Good stuff, fellows. Appreciate the shout out and you tuning in. Continue to do your thing. Appreciate you. Listen, I'm getting to the point where I'm ready I think JB has to do something. And I've said it that I would keep him in the starting lineup and make him sink or swim. I think we've seen that now. 25 games of it. I've said I would not put JD on the bench, like the second unit center. I would put him on the bench for a few games. And to be honest, I'm starting to get there where if Paul Reed and Isaiah Stewart are both healthy, I would go to JD and say, you know what? You need to take a few games off. And I would start Paul Reed because I do not want to start Isaiah Stewart. I do not want to start Isaiah Stewart because I think the fan base thinks they want him to start and then they will hate him just like they did 2 years ago. But I would put him on the bench for a couple games, I think, at this point, and just say, hey, we're going to let Paul read. We're going to let Stu do this. And then you're going to get your chance again. But this is kind of a wake-up call. This is the message. And let's see how he responds. I'm getting very close to that. And that's somebody who has been very patient with Jalen Duren and this progress and all of that. So, and that leads me into another thing I do want to bring up. So I don't want to cut you off on any JI or JD thoughts before we start to. Yeah. Okay. So we got this from Matthew Crow on Blue Sky. Monty Williams might have been the worst coach in NBA history. We don't need to go into that. But here's one thing I do want to bring up. I want to remind everybody, 2 years ago, what did everybody want to happen to Dwayne Casey? They wanted him fired because he was a bad coach. That was JD and JI's rookie year, and everybody thought Dwayne was an awful coach and needed fired. Then they bring in Monty Williams, and everybody has the same thoughts about Monty Williams as a coach. So then in year 2, JD and JI get a coach who is fired after 1 year of a 6-year, $60 million contract. I am not here trying to defend these guys, but if we are going to say that coaching is important, Omari, and we are going to say last year was a dumpster fire and 75% of the fan base wanted Casey fired, then can't we give these guys a little bit of freedom and a little bit of leniency that they are now in year 3 finally getting coached in a competent way based on how most people felt about the coaching they got in their first 2 years? So listen, I was cool with Dwayne Casey as well. I was on the other side of that. I'm just saying, I feel like at times we're talking out of both sides when we say this team was poorly coached for the last 2 years, and then we're mad because these 2 guys haven't improved at the way we want them to improve. Even if you did like Casey, last year and they went from Casey, fine, to Monty, dumpster fire, to this year. That's not always easy. So that's part of why, Omari, I'm a little more comfortable giving some leniency with them figuring it out. But I do think it's time to challenge JD in a real way.
Yeah, and that's always an interesting debate to me. You kind of have like this nature versus nurture debate, like how much of it is coaching and how much can you blame inconsistent or uneven coaching for the first 2 years for where guys are in year 3. I always struggle with that debate because, one, every player is different, but you also look at NBA history and a lot of guys have figured things out in like less than perfect circumstances. Like circumstances are not, especially in the league where, coaches get fired so much faster. Like it's not uncommon to have multiple coaches your first few years. Like these are not necessarily outlier situations that they had to deal with. So like on one hand, it's like I do accept that argument. And I think anytime you have a new coach, there's going to be an adjustment period, especially when you have not played quite at that level. I also look at, like Ron has come in and, like just look at what he's done defensively, right? Like Ron still like half knows what he's doing out there a lot of times because he's so raw, but he's got the awareness to know where he needs to be on defense, or here's how I could impact this game and give it really what it needs, right? So, like after this season, I think we'll have a much better idea of like kind of where Ivy and, Duren stand as players, but I try not to lean on that as much just because you look at NBA history, like how many coaches have truly been like great coaches, right? Like how many coaches have truly been known for player development? Sometimes it's the coach, sometimes it's just the player, and I think we'll know by the end of this season. But yeah, personally, that's just not something I've ever really read into as much. Like, I think when you're in the NBA, you have NBA resources still. Like, it's not like, Monty didn't have a training staff and guys weren't in the lab working, right? So we can move on. I know we got to get to segment 3, but I'm always intrigued by that debate of how much of it is coaching, how much of it is just the player, essentially.
Yeah, no, and listen, I want to be clear. I had no problem with Dwayne Casey. I was not one of them, carrying the pitchforks. Keith, I believe with you. I agree. Part of development is learning how to win. Like I'm with you. I get it. I understand all of that. I don't think there's a starting center on this team. And at the end of the day, you invested a lottery pick in one of these guys and not in others. And I'm sure you'll disagree with me that it should matter what was invested in. He also has the highest ceiling of the 3, in my opinion. But I am losing patience as well in terms of like at some point you have to try something that's going to get it to change. So when we come back, we have a bunch of stuff starred. We have some other things in the outline. We'll get to all of that when we come back from this short break.
All right, we are back with segment 3, and I have the outline up, but my hotel Wi-Fi is so slow that it's kind of loading right now. Where are we leading off for segment 3?
Yeah, let's go through the starred questions. No, let's stay in the outline. Let's stay in the outline. Which guys are truly pillars to build around? So I kind of have twofold. Cade is the pillar, and that's what like people can say whatever they want about where this team is. The hardest thing to do in the NBA is get a Cade Cunningham. To get a true franchise type player. I think Cade is a franchise type player, and I think he's proven it out, especially this season with his play, with the triple doubles, all of that, the improvements defensively. Now you have to build out around him. I think he is a true pillar. As I mentioned earlier, I'm kind of leaning a little bit more with what Keith Black Trudeau said in terms of Asar and Ron, but I don't think anybody else is off the table. Like if there is a move to be made and it makes sense, like my thing is Cade is in a tier of his own. And then for me, it would be Asar, Ron, J.I., and then there would be like nobody else is in a tier where like I'm really holding strongly to that.
Yeah. The pillar is Cade, obviously. I think everybody's in 110% agreement on that. From there, the debate really is which of these guys are really going to be, the ones who take this to that next stage, right? Like if you're OKC, you needed Shea, but you also needed Chet and Jalen Williams to really get somewhere. If you're Houston and you have Şengün, but you also have all these other guys like Amin Thompson's been good for him. Bryce Smith Jr. has been a bit up and down, but Van Fleet. They have Tari Eason, like they have all these guys who have truly stepped up. I think with the Pistons, because they're still pretty early in it from a winning standpoint, you kind of have to give the benefit of the doubt a bit. But for me, it just wouldn't be Asar and Ron, because just based on what I've seen, I think those are the guys who are going to impact winning the most. And I think their archetypes are the hardest to get, where everybody wants 6'6" athletes, but it's hard to get 6'6" athletes who can inherently impact the game like Asar and Ron can. So I think that's where I'm at right now. Like it would just be Cade. I think Cade's gotten there. And then I think just purely off of upside and just the fact that you still have a few more years to figure out contract decisions on those guys as well. Like I would just go Ron and Asar, just from the standpoint of maximizing what you have and swinging on the upside, essentially.
So Order of the Blazing Horse says tier 3. I kind of said Stu, Beasley, Sasser. I actually really agree with Stu and Beasley. I'm not as high on Sasser. I always appreciate Marcus Sasser for coming on the pod. It's not even a Marcus Sasser. Like, I don't know if he can fall into the role that I think he would be most successful in. So maybe I should just give up on that. But I would love if they retain Malik Beasley. I also want to say real quick, though, we like crush people for both sides of the floor. Malik Beasley has not been good defensively. He's been unreal offensively. Unreal. The value is not even a discussion, in my opinion, of what he's brought offensively. But let's not act like he's been a two-way player this year. He's made plenty of mistakes on the defensive end and all of that. I just want to get that out there. Listen, I hope people remember that I was essentially on an Isaiah Stewart island a couple years ago when everybody else hated that dude and wanted him traded. So I'm very much Isaiah Stewart can help you win basketball games, especially coming off the bench. So I think we're in agreement there, which leads us into the next thing. How should they approach the deadline, or how should they approach the offseason? So this will give me a chance to shout out some people, Omari. Brendan Cruz said his biggest takeaway, the two biggest needs we have right now is a starting center and a second creator. Bobby Buckets over on Blue Sky. Cade thrives when surrounded by shooting. Need to get a stretch big. We had some more here from Darius Harris. Here today, big picture, the Pistons need a player next to Cade who can score in diverse ways. They are supposed to get that from Tobias, Beasley, THJ, Feast or Famine. Team Savant mentioned a starting lineup of Cade and then Holland or Beasley, B.I., Asar, Miles Turner. And then Mr. Jones says, we do not have our number 2. So all of those kind of hit on the same thing. in terms of what is the next step. We sat here and talked about what do we think JI is, JD, Asar, Ron. What is the next move, whether at the deadline or in the offseason, Omari?
Yeah. Next offseason will be interesting because they could either consolidate immediately and say, these are our young guys, and we're moving forward, and the rest of our money is going to role players who could help us be a reasonable basketball team. Or they could sit tight, keep all the young guys for another year, allow some of these decisions to come essentially down to the wire. JI and JD specifically. But you know what? Just repeat the question real quick. I had a point I was going to make. I want to make sure I hit it with 15 minutes left.
No, we're good. We're going to go overtime today.
Okay,
we
cool.
already talked about this because we're doing we're going to do the trivia at the end. So essentially, it's just what should the approach be? So I guess more specifically, do you agree that the biggest needs right now are that second scoring option and a center, specifically a stretch center, like a guy that can space the floor of some kind? Okay.
Yeah. Like at this point, the question is just the core franchise building stuff. Like I talked about Jalen Williams and Chet, and you see what other teams have. It's like, you need that rim protector. You need that second scorer. Next offseason, I'm looking at an overall just team-wide autopsy. Like, how do we get to the next stage of being a potential playoff team? And if it's those two things, if that's what you need, then that's what I focus on next offseason. If that's through the draft and you're going to try to get an Ace Bailey or, Dylan Harper, like whoever, then you go that way. If you think you can do it in the trade market, you do that. But, I think you have to be very, very, careful at this stage. And I would not spend any money taking risks. I think K's your max guy with the second apron and everything else. At that point, you just keep pushing it forward. And if you don't have those things, then again, if you're going to get through the draft, focus on the draft, run it back. But I wouldn't make too many big financial commitments next offseason. Long story short, you identify what you need, and then you figure out the best way to get that, whether that's through the draft or a trade. But I just wouldn't spend money just to spend money at this stage. I think you have to be very careful.
So you continuing to mention the draft, I think, is important because that is why I would not do the move at the deadline. I would let this season play out, get more data, hopefully 50-some games on what you think JI can or cannot be, get the final data on JD, all that. But then you get to figure out where your draft pick is. And I think that's important because let's say they luck in the lottery, Omari. Then I will draft Ace Bailey and feel good about making him that guy and not like I had to go make a trade to get that guy, depending on how Ace finishes out the year and all of that. Like I realize that. And it's not a sure thing. If I end up 10th in the draft or 11th in the draft, now I may feel a little bit more pressure to go make that trade. So I think that's why I would wait until the offseason. But I don't mind and would encourage that they do make that move this offseason, whether it's the draft, if they think that player is in the draft, or if they end up having to make a trade. A big part of this for me is I think Cade is ready. I think he's there. It's a 24-game sample this year where it's been this level, but I've always thought this is who he was going to be. And so I don't want to waste even young years of Cade any more than you have to. And so I would, again, not at the deadline. At the deadline, I would hope I could take in bad money or the third team in a deal, acquire an asset or a future pick, whatever. And then I go into the offseason either saying I'm going to draft who I think that second option is, or I'm going to make a move to get them. Unless you think it's going to be Ron Holland or something like that. So I would speed it up a little bit this offseason in terms of that, because I just absolutely think Cade is ready.
They're going to have some difficulties because they are in such a weird spot for a team that's in a rebuild where you take over, your franchise player who is there. I think we both agree that he's there. He's averaging 24, 10, and 8. Like, good efficiency. That's pretty self-explanatory. But you don't have that second guy. And that second guy may or may not be on the roster. It could be Ron, it could be Asar, maybe JR and JD have another leap, but that guy is not on the roster. And Cade is about to become a max player. So you're going to have some sort of timeline issue, right? Either you're drafting a rookie when Cade is in year 5, and you're hoping that this guy is that guy who could grow into that role, or you're continuing to roll with who's on the roster now, trusting that one of them will get there. But you don't have assets outside of your young guys. You still don't have a first round pick. So when I talk about being in a weird spot, like I think the draft pick scenario kind of falls into that. So if K is there, like what is your avenue to get that second guy in a reasonable amount of time that it's not just, well, Ace Bailey or Dylan Harper are going to be stars by year 2. I think that's what they really have to figure out next offseason. And that's a tough one to solve. If you have assets, you can just go and get a star, even if it's just a placeholder guy. I think that helps a lot. But without those assets, and if your young guys are not replacing the value of a first-round pick, now you're looking at bringing in some sort of distressed asset, and maybe that guy works out, maybe he doesn't. They are in a weird spot. So I kind of think about those aspects as well when I think about what you do with JI and JD. It's just that you still need that second guy. And if it's not them, then you've got to do something drastic at some point to kind of make sure you get somebody that is on K's timeline as well.
We said this even whenever Troy was still here. As much as he mismanaged little moves, we said there is still a needle to be thread here. It's just very, very thin, the margin of error. I think Trajan's, probably in a situation where it's not as dire, but listen, eventually they're gonna have to take the swing unless Ron just really shows out or JI shows out. And to your point, I love Ace Bailey, but he's young. He's not on the, I guess he's on the same timeline as Cade, but it may take Ace 3-4 years to get to the type of player we're talking about. The ideal scenario for me is to upgrade the center position. Miles Turner's the name in the chat. It's always going to be the name. He's an unrestricted free agent. I love that idea. I love Miles Turner. If they could bring in Miles Turner, a placeholder, and a placeholder second option, second score, whatever, I think that's where I would want to go, especially if you're going to get a high draft pick. I like that idea a lot because I don't know the name that you make a move for that is like the one that's going to build with Cade. Who is that player that's going to be that guy, right? Like, listen, I'm more Zach LaVine than probably anybody, and he's playing really well this year, by the way, and had a big night against the Celtics as the Pistons were losing to the Jazz. But I'm not here like pretending he's the answer and he's the guy that's going to build this out for the next 7 or 8 years. So, like, again, like you said, that's where it's weird, and they're in an interesting spot because I would love to know what they think Ron Holland's upside and ceiling is, right? Because that's very telling if they think he could be that guy. So I don't know. That the perfect scenario for me is you get a placeholder option plus upgrade center plus you get a young guy, and that's pie in the sky. Like that's not realistic. You're not going to draft Ace Bailey, trade for Zach LaVine-ish. I'm not saying him specifically, Zach LaVine-ish, and sign Miles Turner this offseason. Like that's not realistic. So I think you end up having to solve one or the other of those problems. The one thing I want to point out, and then I actually want to do the NBA draft thing because people actually ask about it. If people want Asar and Ron to play together, I do think you need a stretch big. So, like, I love those guys, but if you're going to play them together, especially right now, it does kind of force your hand in what else you put around them, Omari. So that's kind of my final thoughts on all of that stuff. You have any takeaways from the third of the year? Because we got some NBA draft stuff, so it gives me a chance to work it into the episode.
Yeah, the only other thing I would say is you look at the Pistons doing the maneuver they did with Paul Reed, to re-sign him essentially and save $4 million. And you look at the unique position in the league of being, probably one of the few teams that could actually take on assets. And we talk about timeline stuff and this and that. I do wonder how much of this upcoming deadline will just be Trajan saying, we need to load up our tool chest because to get that second guy for Cade, we are going to need a tool chest. So like let's get it together. And I wonder how much of this upcoming trade deadline will just be, let's bring in some assets so that we can eventually go out and make some moves to get some real players around Cade. And that's really kind of all I have to say about that. But that's where I'm at after the first third of the season. Looking at where they're positioning themselves, I'm looking at what they have to do after this season. And it seems like February is that window to actually try to get some assets in and make those moves down the road. So
yeah, that's a good point. Like this team does between the young players, if you acquired some future draft capital, you could be in a pretty good position. You're never going to outbid the Thunder or the Rockets or somebody like that, but you could be in a decent enough position to acquire that player if necessary. The last thing, West did have like JB in the outline. I think he's been good. I know people don't like the starting rotation. I haven't been as quick because, as people pointed out, I think it's fair to give players time to adjust to being held to whatever standard and accountability and all of that. We're starting to get to the point where that needs to happen. I wonder if we don't see a star in the starting lineup for Tim Hardaway Jr. eventually. I mentioned what I'm ready for with Jalen Duren. Overall, I think he's been fine. We knew the offensive creativity wasn't going to be there. Hasn't been there. I wish he would run out of timeout actions for Cade or J.I. as opposed to always for Beasley, Tim Hardaway Jr., or Tobias Harris. Defensively, it was better. It's slipping a little bit, but they're just not disruptive enough. This is the team that's last in steals and middle of the pack in blocks. But again, they have 11 wins right now, and they won 14 times last year and lost 28 straight. So any thoughts on JB before we move on?
No, I just think that JB's kind of been as expected, which is good overall. Like you said, they have 11 wins. They are better defensively, although they've been more so average now after the really hot start. I think he's figured out some stuff with Cade that hadn't been figured out previously, which even if it's just, putting the ball in his hands as much as you can, that's still probably an improvement over what they had previously. So, yeah, I mean, through 28 games, like to have 11 wins, to be on track for 32 or 33 or whatever, like I would just say he's come in. They're clearly on a better trajectory. You could always nitpick, but this time last year, they were on game 25 in the streak or whatever. So they're not on game 25 in the streak this year. So credit to JB for that.
Atomic Bugala Band. Ivy is an enigma. Are we definitely ruling him out as the second guy? No, I'm not. That's why I said I would definitely give out another 60 games to figure it out, or 50 or whatever they had. I'm just saying that right now, I don't think your data, if you had to put a percentage, I don't think it would be over 50% that he is based on what we've seen so far. But we will see. And again, that's what hopefully he gets back healthy, he gets on the floor, and we get more data. Okay. Last thing before we do trivia, Dax Hoops, and then Wes had it in the outline as well. Do you feel like there are players that you'd like for the Pistons in the mid lottery in the 7 to 10 range? So here's my thing. First, with this draft, everybody talks about how good this draft is. And what I've realized being in this space, Omari, is people only talk about a draft in terms of the top of the draft. Everybody said last year's draft sucked because you didn't have the high-end talent at the top. Everybody says this draft is amazing because you have 4 or 5 guys at the top that are really exciting. Should be worth noting that the 5 guys in the top 5 has already changed in the last couple months. Nolan Traore out, VJ Edgecombe out, Kasparis Yakishonis in, Yegor Damon in. And so things have already changed a little bit. That I don't think, for me, that pick 10 on my board last year and number 10 on my board this year is that much different in terms of what you think you're getting. Now, obviously, we're wrong, right? Like, I had Jared McCain, like, right at the end of the lottery, and he's proven to be better than that. So I'm not saying that this is all right. I'm just saying if I look at who was number 10 on my board last year and who's at number 10 on my board this year, I don't know that I feel a whole lot differently about those guys in my evaluation. So I wanted to get that out there because I think when people hear that, oh, the 2025 draft is so good, they think the first round is just loaded with talent. And that's not the case. Vicini said the other day, like, he can't even put 30 guys as first round picks. Now, we haven't got through the whole year and all of that. But to the question now, do you have anybody? Listen, I know how busy you are, so I don't know if you had a chance to look into some of these names or no.
I haven't. This is the first year since I've been on the Pistons that I've not looked at much draft stuff through the first third of the season. Which again is just a credit to the fact that they're in the playoff conversation and not in a very long losing streak. So I'm familiar with the top 5, 6. Once you get past the range the Pistons are more likely to be in, which is 7 through 17 or whatever. Let's check back in a few months. I'm not there yet.
Okay,
I'm gonna let you cook. Bryce is our resident draft expert.
I will throw names at you and
cool.
what type of players they are, and then you tell me how you feel about it. Mr. Ray brings up a funny point. Welcome to the NBA draft space where we proclaim things before the college season is even over. Mr. Ray, what are we supposed to do for 10 months if we don't do that? Okay. Like we gotta provide content some way. So, all right, I will start. Listen, if they get in the top 5, people should be excited. Obviously, Cooper, Ace, Dylan, all of that. Liam McNeely, let me start there. UConn, freshman, wing, really shoots it. Good sized kid, can really defend, rebounds, like smart player. Does that sound like a player that would fit into the roster? Or is it like, oh, maybe not the star upside? But I think he has all of the intangibles along with being a high level shooter. That's a name. How does that archetype sound to you, Omari?
Sounds good. They need defense. Only high level defender you can bring in.
I didn't say high level. I said I said he was solid on defense. I said he was a high level shooter.
Solid's good too. High level shooter, solid on defense is also a great archetype for this Pistons team.
Okay. Trey Johnson is a name I saw earlier. Trey Johnson is a bucket out of Texas, another freshman, skinny guard, kind of has a tough shot diet in terms of how he gets his buckets. But this would kind of be your swing for the fences. He could be like, okay, you have Cade, you put Trey Johnson in there, you have Asar, Ron, and then you figure out the center position. So that's another name there. What is your appetite for a skinny guard that's a bucket getter, young player? What do you think about that?
Sounds good. If you can really shoot it, yeah, you have, like, let's say you have just a lineup of like all 6'6" dudes and then a center, right? You have Cade, you have Ron, assuming Ron can shoot, you have Asar, and then you have Trey Johnson, and Trey can shoot. Like, it sounds fun. I don't know. I'm down for it.
No, and I think here's what the Cade, Ron, Asar thing does for you. I mentioned how those two guys being on the floor allows Cade to guard the third best player.
Mm-hmm.
Guess what that allows the fourth dude to do? He gets to go guard the fourth best player on the other team. So like a Trey Johnson, hey, just go get buckets, my guy, because all you have to do is guard the other team's fourth best player. Yeah. So Chili says something interesting, 0 appetite for a guard. Here's what's not great in the first round, guys, bigs. So this is not the best draft for a big. I don't consider Cooper a big. I consider him a forward. Asa Newell at Georgia is a guy that you could look at. He would be interesting here. I don't think he's necessarily anchor of your defense. Derek Queen is another interesting name, but there's not a ton of bigs right now. The guy I loved was Kamen Malawach at Duke, and he just hasn't been that. So I will give you a name that I don't think Rasheer Fleming, the big man class, is underrated. Well, I think it's nice in the second round, and maybe some of these guys move up. Rasheer Fleming is a guy that I think eventually ends up in the lottery. He may not quite be there, but he's a name that I really like. So those are some names for me. I think the Pistons have the Raptors' second round pick, and so I think that's where you would add a center to the roster, but they already have plenty of backup centers. So I don't know that adding one in the second round makes a whole lot of sense. But as Mr. Ray pointed out, it's December. The draft is going to change a lot over the next few months. We all remember the rise of Bilal Coulibaly. That's my thing. Order of the Blazing Horse says no. Asa Newell, we got Stu. I don't know that I look at any of these bigs right now and think they're starters. And so I think it's attacking something else in the draft, or like Devin says here, trade the pick, potentially. So that's an option as well. All right, Wes, you want to join now because I want to play trivia.
I'm curious to see what this trivia is. That's what I'm really interested in.
It's going to be fun. Okay, so we're going to play 7 rounds here. All right, you two are going to go back and forth. We are going to try to name from top to bottom Pistons roster only in these specific statistical categories. Okay, so Omari, you're going to start, and then Wes, you'll go, then Omari, then Wes. Whoever gets out, the other person gets the point. Okay, so we're going to start with points per game. So we are moving down the list from most points per game to least points per game, going Omari, Wes, Omari, Wes. Okay? Does everybody understand the game?
Yes.
Current, right? Though, not like historic. You talked historic last week, so I want to make sure.
Oh, this is the current roster. Everybody's included. I know Asar has only played 8 games. This is everybody on the roster. So now,
this is points per game or total?
No. We will have 7 different categories.
Okay.
The first category is points per game. There will be a totals one later to get to 7. But the first one is simple points per game, 7 rounds. Yes, Mr. Ray. Listen, it's Saturday morning. We're not going to get to record for like 10 days. We're gonna go long here. Okay. I'll give you guys an extra 10 minutes for your Christmas. All right. So Omari, you get to start. Whoever gets it wrong, there's the other person doesn't have to get right or any of that other stuff. That gets confusing. Okay. So Omari, you start us off. You're going to give us the top point per game guy on the Pistons, and then we'll start to work our way down the list. So Omari, start us off.
Cade Cunningham.
Cade Cunningham is correct. Okay. So Wes, you are looking for number 2 on the Pistons in terms of points per game.
I feel like it's either Ivy or Beasley. I'm just trying to decide which.
Well, you shouldn't have said that, because now if you get it right, you just gave Omari the other answer.
But I do that. Yeah, but I do that though.
Well, but yeah, this one, I was about to say, like, the number 1 was a gimme too. I feel like the top 3 are kind of gimmies. It's just the order that they're in, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to go Ivy. I'll go Jaden Ivey.
Correct.
All right, so Beasley's number 3.
Beasley is number 3. So for reference, Cade's at 23.9. Ivy's at 17.3, Beasley 16.4. Number 4 on the list, Wes.
Is this going to be Tobias Harris?
Tobias Harris at 13.7.
Nice.
This is where it gets fun. Number 5, Omari.
So we're at Cade, Ivy,
Beasley, Harris.
Tobias, and then who is number 5?
Okay, so here's what I'll allow you guys. Like, you can pull up the roster, like just the roster if you guys want, just to make sure you're remembering all the names. Just don't go to B-ball reference and cheat.
Yeah, I'm not gonna do that because I feel like I'm gonna accidentally pull up the stats. So I'm just stay here.
As Keith Black Trudeau says, this is where it gets really sad. He's not wrong. So we have. I'm gonna go THJ. So we have some Jalen Durans in the chat. We have a Stu or THJ. Number 5. Who did you say?
I said Omari? THJ for 5.
THJ is number 5 at 9.8 per game. So now we are looking for number 6, Wes.
Number 6. Okay, and so we went Cade, J.I., Beasley, Harris, Tim Hardaway Jr.
at 9.8.
9.8. Ooh, okay. Duran. I think Duran.
Duran is number 6 at 8.8. We are now to number 7 on the list, Omari.
Ooh, now this is where it gets dicey because I'm sure it's a bunch of guys within like.
So for the record, the next 1, 2, 6 guys on this list are all within 2.4 points per game of each other.
Yeah, I knew it was going to be like really, really, really close. All right, so I said THJ and then it was Duran, right?
Yep.
So I'm actually going to go Asar.
Asar is the answer at 7.8 points per game.
Let's go.
No.
All right.
Let's go.
We are looking for number 8 on this list.
Oh, no.
I
thought I had that.
Yes.
For what it's worth, it now goes down to 6.4. The next 5 guys are between 6.4 and 5.4.
6.4. Who's averaging? So this next guy's averaging 6.4 points per game is what you just said, right?
Yeah.
I did pull up the roster next to me. It's on ESPN, so I don't have the actual numbers. So
you're good.
Just want to make that clear since I'm looking away.
Love it. We get a Wendell Moore Jr. here. Everybody is available.
Yeah, I mean that's not a bad one. I'm just trying to cross out Nate. Is it Ron Holland?
So close. Ron Holland averages 6.3 points. Simone Fontecchio averages.
Oh, that was my other guess.
I would have said Stu. Wow.
So it goes
Stu's low.
Fontecchio 6'4", Sasser also at 6'4", Holland at 6'3", Stu at 6, B-Ball Paul at 5'4". I probably wouldn't have counted Alondas Williams since it's one game, and then Wendell Moore Jr. at 4.3. Okay, so Omari gets the point. Very good. All right. Everybody understands the game now. So Wes, you'll start off. Stop. Not total. rebounds per game. Total just meaning offense and defense. So rebounds per game. Omari is up 1-0 here. Second round, rebounds per game.
Jalen Duren.
Jalen Duren is correct. We're looking for number 2.
Cade.
Cade is number 2.
Stu.
Incorrect. Amari takes a 2-0 lead. Tobias.
Wow.
Tobias.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
He has been rebounding pretty well. Like he's having like 7, right?
I mean, it's also a minutes thing. Like if you do per 36, Stu is second with over 2 more per 36 minutes. But Tobias really rebounds on the defensive end. So JD at 9, Cade over 7, Tobias right under 7, Stu at 6. Then it would have really gotten fun. So points per minute would have been a hilarious question. Yeah, that's very true.
That would have been good.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So it is.
I would have got up and left. Points per minute. I'll see y'all later.
Okay. 2-0. This one's gonna get awesome. Okay. Assists per game. Omari, you start off.
Cade.
Wes.
It's gotta be Ivy, right?
It's Ivy. Yeah. Don't overthink it.
Okay.
Yeah. Don't overthink it. This is where it gets fun. Good luck, Omari. Looking for number 3.
Duren.
It's not a bad guess.
It's not a bad guess.
It is not Duren. Wes finally gets on the board. Tobias 2.4. Asar 2.4. Duren 2.3. So
come on. Really, I knew they were on that site. Like I was gonna say it's either Asar or Duren, but Tobias is a good one too.
Yeah, really, really, really good one there. So what do we have? Omari 2, Wes 1. So we played 3 games. 4, 5. Yeah. Okay. Now, again, this one will get interesting fast. Turnovers per game. Wes, lead it off.
Cade.
Ivy.
Duren. Yes. Jalen Duren.
I knew he was going to be number 3.
Yep.
Just off passing volume alone, it was going to be Duren at 3. Nah. I don't even know. Who has just been like turnover prone or like passes a lot? Like I feel like it's gonna be so many guys for like a certain range.
I will say this one's gonna make a lot of sense once you hear the answer. But for the record, it's like this person's at 1.5 and 5 different guys average 1 or more. So it's close.
Ooh, I know the answer.
Well, I'm gonna go Tobias. That's my guess.
Great guess. What was your guess gonna be, Wes?
Asar.
I
just looked at this for the pin down the other night.
Asar is at 1.5 per game here early on. So,
I was thinking him too. Like I have not really tracked his turnovers since he came back, but
yeah, he's had some bad ones. Obviously not, but in 17 minutes a game, 1.5 is substantial. Then Tobias, Stu, Beasley, Hollins on down the roster. Okay, this one will be fun.
So we're tied.
We're tied 2-2.
Okay.
We have 1 more per game, and then we'll do 2 totals. Minutes per game, Omari. Minutes per game. Cade is 1. Tobias is 2.
Nice.
Ivy
is 3.
Now it's tough.
It gets real interesting.
Cade, Tobias, Ivy. Man. Beasley?
That's a great poll. It is Malik Beasley.
Yes.
I would not have guessed this. And it's kind of interesting that yes, Malik Beasley. That was a great call. Somebody got it in the chat too. Chili, nice. I would not have got that for what it's worth.
All right, I'm going to go THJ.
Great. You guys are doing way better at this than I thought you would. That is correct. 1 through 5. Cade, Harris, Ivy, Beasley, THJ. Back to you, Wes.
Crap.
Crap does not play for this team.
No, they don't.
What was the topic again?
Sometimes they do. Minutes per game.
Minutes per game, yeah.
You got it right, and you didn't even know this. You didn't even know the topic.
I did. Well, I already had THJ in my head, so after you said B's, I just stuck with it. But I actually did forget what the topic was. Yeah,
that's wild.
THJ was already in my head, so I'm just like, I'm just thinking THJ. Like, I'm sure I did I did the math clearly to arrive at THJ, so I'm gonna just stick with it.
You're the best, Omari. I love it.
I'm tired.
Oh man,
fair enough.
Stewart.
It is Jalen Duren.
Jalen Duren. Wow. I figured it was one of those two.
Yeah. 24 a game for Duren, 21 for Stu. Then it goes Fontecchio, Thompson, Holland, the rest of the guys. Okay, so Omari is at 3, Wes is at 2. So technically the game could end here. We are now going totals. Okay, totals. Omari, totals. 3-point makes. Total 3-point makes on the season. Wes, start us off.
Malik Beasley?
That's a really good guess. Of course it's Malik Beasley.
Oh, okay. Good. You made me worried there with your response.
Yeah, I was gonna say, isn't he like top 5 and make?
Yeah, like yeah. That's what's nice about all of these. Like whoever gets to go first, I don't know that it's a great advantage because the number one answer is almost always obvious. Okay, I think it immediately gets interesting.
Cade
is number 2.
Okay.
I'm gonna go with the chat since they're all saying Tim Hardaway Jr. I'm gonna go with that.
Tim Hardaway Jr.
Okay, cool.
Tobias.
Incorrect. It is actually Jaden Ivey. So we have a tie. So Beasley, Cade, J.I., and Tim Hardaway Jr. actually have the exact same amount of makes. So whichever order we got it, I was going to take. Then Tobias, then Fontecchio, Sasser, Holland. Yep. All right. So we are tied 3-3 with probably the hardest one that I left for last. So we will get a winner here. Omari, you get to start. We are going totals again. Free throw makes. Total free throws made. Real quick, Will J says 52 watching, 15 likes. I don't know if that means he thinks we suck or he's asking everybody to hit the like button. But either way, hit the like button.
Total free throws made. It's like, I don't want to overthink it, but at the same time,
Keith Black Trudeau, we should have just brought Keith on for this. Malik already more than halfway to the team record for threes in a season, by the way. Love it.
That's good to know.
Free throws made. Free throws made.
I'm gonna just go Cade, probably off volume.
Cade.
Okay.
Don't overthink it.
Okay. Don't overthink it. Ivy.
Okay. Will J says hit the like button, please. I appreciate it, Will J. I was like, all right. I don't know which way you're going with this. I hope it's the asking everybody to hit the like button. All right. For what it's worth, 1 make difference between those two. Cade at 80, J.I. at 79. Yep.
Wow.
J.I.'s taken more than him. All right. We're looking for number 3. This is for I know. Listen, Will J, I thought you were a supporter. I feel like you've been here. That's my bad. My bad, man. Sorry.
Man, who is third in free throws made? Who's it would have to be I'm just trying to think volume. But I feel like this team doesn't shoot a lot of free throws.
That they do not.
Which makes it tough because we're comparing a bunch of guys who
26 in the NBA in free throws per field goal attempt. Yeah. And you name the 2 guys that do it best.
Yeah. It's there are no outliers on this team as far as that.
So here, for what it's worth, those guys were at 80 and 79. The next guy is at 49. And then it goes 39, 36, 31, 30, 29, 27.
I'm going to go Duren number 3.
That is a great guess, Omari, but it is wrong.
Ooh, nah.
Wes takes the win. Can you tell us the name then? Who is it?
No, I have no idea.
It's Tobias Harris.
Tobias,
JD, Tim Hardaway Jr., Fontecchio, Beasley, Stu, Holland, Reed. Obviously, Asar hasn't played the game.
For what it's worth, my guess would have been Duren as well.
Yeah, I'm it's either Duren or Tobias, but I can't remember Tobias taking a single free throw this season, which I know he has. I just have no memory of it, so I don't know.
I was actually going to go Beasley with the next guess if you had gotten it right, because he keeps getting those technical foul free throws.
Yeah, he does.
Duran has taken the third most. So the reason
Duran's
Duran's
the third most, but the fourth bait. Okay.
So Duran's probably a bad answer solely because he's shooting 58% from the free throw line. But if you're just thinking volume, it made a lot of sense.
That's basically all I did. I was just volume wise, it's going to be JD. I just don't know if he has the makes.
Yep. Sneaky regression there from the free throw line for Jalen Duran. So
the trivia master wins.
I hope that was fun. I know somebody brought it up. I wish I could remember who suggested that we did it this way. It may have been YouTube user. So thank you for that. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it going into Christmas here. I know the episode ran a little bit longer than normal. We knew it was going to. But I thought this was something we could bring back, 2/3 of the way through the season, into the season, all of that. And whatever keeps me out of having to answer trivia questions, I am always for. So, Wes, thank you.
That's the real plan here.
Oh, 1,000%. There's always some calculation behind it. So, Wes, thank you. Make sure you guys are listening to Wes and Blake over on the Pin Down on the DBB YouTube channel. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in live. If you're listening after the fact, over Christmas, later, whatever, remember, we did record this on Saturday morning. We had to with, all of the stuff with Christmas, all of that, to get this out to you. We will be back a little over a week. It might be 10 days because Omari and I will both be in Denver. So once we both get back from that, we'll figure it out. But thank you guys so much. Omari, take it away, my guy.
Yeah. Again, we will also be in Denver next week. Me and Bryce will be recording from Denver next week. So tap in with us next weekend. They play, that game is Saturday, right? So
Saturday night. Yep.
Yeah. So we'll record either before the game or after the game Saturday or before Sunday. So we'll keep you all posted on that. Otherwise, big thanks to our audio producer, Robert Chan, our editor-in-chief, Nicole Avery Nichols. Big shout out to Wes Davenport, as always. And Merry Christmas, everybody. We'll talk to you all next week.